Fears of a trade war are certainly growing. President Trump calling the EU, quote, as bad as China, reiterating threats to hit car imports with punitive tariffs. Still waiting on word on that one. The EU responding, threatening almost $300 billion worth of tariffs against the United States, or at least damage if U.S. goes through with those auto tariffs. Joining us now on all of this is the European Union Ambassador to the United States, Ambassador David O'Sullivan, joining us from Brussels. Welcome, Mr. Ambassador. First, if I could just get you to respond to the comments of President Trump over the weekend. The EU is possibly as bad as China, just smaller on trade. It's terrible what they do to us.
Well, actually, the EU economy is slightly larger than the Chinese economy. But more importantly, I obviously don't agree with the president that the EU is bad for the United States on trade. Our trading relations are very fair and equally based. And American companies make a lot of money out of trade and investment transatlantically, including the massive investment that comes from Europe into the United States and the profits American companies make here operating in Europe. So I don't think that those are fair comments.
When the president says things like it's tough to sell American products in Europe, including cars, including agriculture, because Europe does have a robust agricultural economy that it wants to protect, is Europe willing to sit down and negotiate with this president over lowering some barriers?
Well, I think both economies, the U.S. and the EU economy, are very open. We have some barriers on our side, but frankly, for every barrier you find in Europe, I can find an equivalent one in the United States. We haven't been able to export many of our agricultural products to the U.S. So I don't think this is an unlevel playing field. But of course, we are willing. We were engaged in the TTIP negotiations, a comprehensive trade deal with the previous administration. We're always willing to sit down and negotiate and discuss how we can improve trade relations. But frankly, not under the threat of unilateral tariffs unfairly and unlegally imposed.
Let's talk about the EU's statement in response to the Commerce Department over those threats of auto imports. You say that this could put $300 billion worth of U.S. products at risk. How did you guys get to a number like that?
Well, we believe that these proposed measures lack legitimacy because we don't believe that there is any basis for saying that car imports or auto or parts pose a threat to national security. There's no factual basis economically, and this is contrary to international rules and would expose the United States potentially to around $300 billion worth of retaliation, because that would be the value of the imports affected by these measures if ever they were implemented. So that's where the number comes from.
Mr. Ambassador, President Trump has floated the idea of lowering trade barriers, tariff barriers altogether, which strikes me as a potentially extreme move that might have some unintended repercussions. What do you believe is the proper role of these tariff barriers going forward? Do you support the idea, even potential idea, of getting rid of them altogether?
Well, the European Union is one of the most open economies in the world, and we have concluded very ambitious trade deals recently with Canada, with Japan, with Mexico. We're negotiating with the countries of Southeast Asia. So we do believe in continuing to reduce tariffs and non-tariff barriers across the globe. But of course, these have been painfully negotiated in international fora. The U.S. also has subsidies on agriculture. The U.S. also has tariffs, for example, on light trucks, which are very high and which it would like to keep. So I think any discussion has to take into account the political realities of all the trading partners as to just how low we can go in growing trade and reducing barriers. But that is something to which the European Union is committed and is actually implementing on a daily basis.
I'm wondering just how vulnerable Europe is right now economically. We've seen a hit for European stocks recently, worse than U.S. stocks on all of the trade concerns. We just mentioned the immigration negotiations that have been going on. We did see that last-minute deal, but it looks like the Germans and some of the parties are upset about that. If we do see President Trump follow through with his threat to tax cars from Europe to the United States, what does that do to the German economy, given some of the other vulnerabilities out there right now?
Well, of course, a trade war would never be good news. But if you look at the submissions to the Department of Commerce from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, from General Motors and from other contributors, these measures would be hugely damaging to the U.S. economy, costing hundreds of thousands of jobs, increasing prices to consumers, and reducing the growth of GDP. So, of course, it would be not good news for Europe if we get into an escalation of a trade war. But frankly, I think these kind of measures would also be extremely damaging to the American economy.
It's a very big warning put out by the EU, and we thank you for joining us to put some color and commentary around it. Ambassador David O'Sullivan, he is the European ambassador for the EU to the United States in Brussels right now.
Hey there, thanks for checking out CNBC on YouTube. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on all of the day's biggest stories. You can also click on any of the videos around me to watch the latest from CNBC. Thanks for watching.